Hello everyone and welcome back to the X-Ring. So the question is, does DLC suck? And we're going to answer that here in just a few minutes. If you want to know the answer to that and a bunch of other coating type questions, definitely stick around. All right, so we are joined by none other than Tony Marfione with Microtech Knives.
Thanks, Ray.
Thanks for coming out on the channel. So guys, the reason I have Tony here is Tony is the owner of Microtech Knives. He was also the owner of the MSAR project back in the days with Microtech Small Arms Research. So he has a wealth of knowledge when it comes to everything from coating knife parts, whether it's aluminum, steel, or gun parts. And I think this is a really good video to inform you guys why certain coatings work better than others, because Tony literally is a subject matter expert in this. I mean, you literally spend millions of dollars every year coating parts.
100%. I mean, that's part of the DNA of what we do at Microtech. I mean, hundreds of thousands of components each year, but every week we have parts being, whether it be hard chrome, DLC, PVD, anodizing is probably the main, the main subject for Microtech, considering the aluminum chassis.
Yeah.
But yeah, we live, eat, and breathe it on a daily basis.
All right, so guys, a little bit of backstory. You guys might not know this, but I do all the videos for Microtech Knives. If you haven't followed that channel, you might want to check them out. I do a lot of their technical videos. I've been in and out of Microtech for about 12 years. Tony and I go way back, friends first and foremost, but he truly is an expert when it comes to this. But I guess here's the first question we should ask. If you take this raw piece of aluminum, we'll get into all the different materials here in just a minute, why wouldn't we just use this as the knife? Why do we use coatings in the first place?
Coatings are going to not only give the aesthetic appearance, but on top of all these, there's so many different grades of what we consider to be aircraft alloys, or alloys that could be used, from ordnance grade all the way down to pocket knives, or just generalized tools. But aluminum will corrode.
Yes, so it oxidizes, right?
It'll oxidize, it'll pit, it'll corrode, and so first and foremost, we want to get that aesthetic on the part that gives it that corrosion barrier. But the biggest thing, the fundamental that we find in the different types of anodize that we do, some of it being cosmetic, but always part of the structure. A lot of the knives that we engineer today are designed around, around a Type 3 hard coat that's in mind. So, at Microtech, we have two different sets of, dimensional schematics for if we go from Type 2 to Type 3.
Because we're adding
You are adding thickness. And with the anodizing process, basically, let's say on a Type 2, if I could elaborate a little bit, it's good for corrosion. It has good lubricity properties, but it's typically only about maybe a half a thousandths thick.
Okay.
It's very, very, very thin, which allows you to get, and its process allows you to get very vibrant colors depending on the alloy that you're using.
So let me stop you there for just a minute. So this would be a perfect example of a Type 2 that you manufactured. Basically, it's a colored green. It could be red, it could be purple, it could be pink.
Just about anything.
And I guess we've seen this in the gun industry with like Scar. You get a gold Scar, it's got 3 different colors, or a Geisley. So this is a Type 2, because typically this is going to be colored. But like on a Type 3, do you have a Type 3 hard coat over there somewhere?
I do, right here.
Okay, so like on the stitch here, this is a Type 3 hard coat, which is typically going to be a blackish color.
Well, not necessarily blackish. We, depending on which vendor we use, we can go for a jet black. As you already know, that there's 100 different shades. There's 100 different shades of black, and that's achieved not only through the pre-preparation of the material, but also the substrate material matters.
Yep.
Like typically on most of the knives, we use a 6061 T611, which is the hardness factor of that material. Correct. And we purchase it all out of one lot. Think about it. When you say the mismatches on guns, you use a OEM supplier that supplies a forging from an upper and a lower. If they're not chemically correct, the anodizer is going to struggle getting those to match. We use the same exact lot in our builds, 100%, to get as accurate as a finish as we can as far as a color shade is concerned. Because if it's off just a little bit, the customer will totally complain.
You're going to see it, yeah.
So, but even like 6061 T611 is typically our go-to as far as Type 2. It reacts very good. 7000 series, you cannot do effectively Type 2 coatings on that.
Really?
I believe that it's in the chemistry itself. We don't do colors on
7075.
7075. They can achieve a couple different colors, like when you do naturals, it comes out a gold finish.
Okay.
And or we could definitely get a black, maybe even an olive, maybe a dark earth. You could do very subtle changes in the finish, but the 7000 series, because of its hardness and its chemistry, is not going to react to the Type 2, not nearly.
Okay, so for guys that don't do this every day, you got to think. So you've got different grades of aluminum. Okay, now when this aluminum comes out and it's ready, depending on if it's a 6000 series or 7000 series, we have a couple of options on coating. The reason that you coat a material, whether it's steel, aluminum, or anything, is to make that metal have better properties, whether it be durability, whether it be friction resistance, whether it be aesthetics. There are a lot of different reasons why you would want to coat this from the get-go. But depending on the substrate material, like I can tell you that, I'm not going to show you this one yet, but this one's out of 7075. This would be out of 6061. So the Type 2 works well on this, and Type 3 works well on this.
Of course, yes.
But on this, being 7000 series, the Type 2 doesn't work so well, but the Type 3 does.
Yeah, we have yet to, because the anodizers that we work with, there's like, you can get some colors, but it's not going to react.
Got it.
It's not going to react nearly as vibrant, and nor would I put a decorative finish on the 7000
Correct.
series.
But another option, we could Cerakote it.
100%.
You do in-house Cerakoting, and that 100%. Gives you the ability of not only having some durability, but also now we can add aesthetics. You can have this just match pretty much anything. I'm going to go ahead and bring the big elephant into the room. So if you wanted to do a AR like this for your daughter, this is a real firearm, guys, you have the ability to do that with a good Cerakoter. But it's still all about application. You guys know that I did a video. If you might not know, I did a very, very long video for Microtech with regards to Cerakoting and how we do stuff in-house.
When we first started using phenolic coatings back in the 80s, there was very little. Think about this.
Yeah.
You had a few guys that made phenolic coatings. One of them that comes to mind was John Norell. He made a product called Moly resin, is what he called it. A few different shades of black and whatever else. But that was a heat reflective, a non-reflective coating that worked very well. It was very thin, could be applied to bare metals or primed metals or even over the tops of aluminums.
Yep.
And it worked very, very well, and it had a very high corrosion factor. But the Cerakoatings and these nano coatings that these guys are producing today are way off level. So they do have some properties.
Yep.
They do. I've seen high temperature stuff, like the Moly couldn't stand like super hot temperatures and everything else. So the high temperature ceramics that these guys are doing is just and that's not my wheelhouse, but I know that the coatings that we use specifically now from Cerakote gives us an arsenal of things to work on.
Just like even with the suppressors.
Oh, 100%.
We had to use a high temp air cure.
That's right.
Couldn't put that in the oven and cure it in the oven because that's not the high temp.
Right. The high. And it's like even on our chassis, lo and behold, we don't put it over bare aluminum.
Yeah.
So we make that really, really clear. It's either going to be a Type 2 or even a Type 3, which is a natural, which is a good substrate for the coating to adhere to. But we benefit from the internals. We try not to get any of the Cerakote inside the internals on any of the knives.
It's kind of like the ARs. If you take an AR and you Cerakote the whole inside of the upper, it will run, but it's going to be sluggish for the first couple hundred rounds.
It's going to until you start to break through that finish a little bit. But I still strongly believe that, for my go-to type guns, if we're talking about firearms in general, I do not prefer a guy to do an unbelievable Cerakote on just bare aluminum. I want it to be anodized first, and then have the guys do their Cerakote over the top of it. That's the best possible scenario. I mean, the guys will roughen that surface just a little bit, but you got to remember on a class 3, that's anywhere from 2,000 to 2,500 thick.
Thousands, yeah.
And half of that, whatever that number is, when we measure that, we have tools that'll measure the actual thickness of the coating. Half of that number penetrates into the substrate.
Yeah.
So even when you scrape it and the black wears off, if you didn't get through that initial coating, it's still there.
Got it.
So it helps. The biggest part of the hard coat on these things here is corrosion, lubricity, and anti-galling properties, especially
Nice.
on the harder materials. It's the best way. It is the best way.
So guys, when you're talking about firearm parts, this is a forging, and so this is what life would start off on an AR that was forged. Now, from there, you want to protect this once it's milled and everything else, and it's broached and all of that. So you've got options here. You could anodize it.
You could. That's typically would be my choice.
Yeah. Now, if we did a type 2, we could go with a color.
You could. But it's
there's an example of one back there. I thought about grabbing that, but it's not going to be as durable as a type 3 like this.
Correct.
Plain and simple. This is actually thicker, so dimensionally, you have to change internal dimensions to be able to accommodate that. At least they do on the knives.
Well, we do, and I believe that it's going to be the same. It's going to be the same on most of the firearm manufacturers. Do compensate for that particular buildup, because you think about a bore diameter, that's going to change at least 2/1000ths.
Yes.
So if you're building up, if you have just two parts that mate together, it doesn't matter. But when you have a diameter that you have to contend with, especially a tight tolerance between your push pins or any of those sorts of things, you have to compensate for that hard coat because it's 2/1000ths per diameter.
Yeah.
So if you have another mating part that fits inside, you have to compensate.
Stacking tolerance is too tight.
You're starting to stack.
Those are those pins you can't get out.
That is the ones you have to beat out of the guns typically, but. Or they're just simply off. But the hard coating itself, typically we engineer that in, and I believe that the gun manufacturers, at least the most of the good, responsible ones out there, do compensate for those coatings. Yeah.
So we've covered aluminum, and we've covered a lot of those coatings. We didn't talk about DLC yet, which we're getting ready to get into. But we're going to talk about we're going to back down a little bit. We're going to talk about like titanium nitride. We're going to get into these. We're going to get away from the substrate of aluminum and talk about steel now. When you go into steel, whether we're talking about barrels or we're talking about bolt carrier groups or whatnot, you've got options here.
You do. You do.
Now, let me ask you this. There are certain finishes you couldn't put on aluminum because it would absolutely melt it. What would a finish like that be? Like a salt bath type?
Well, salt bath, I mean, you can't put an aluminum substrate that'll melt at 900 degrees in a salt bath that's pushing right around 1,000 degrees or better.
Yep.
So you couldn't do even ion nitriding, which is done inside a vacuum, because those temperatures again are probably pushing close to 1,000 degrees.
Yeah.
So I mean that would not be advisable. That would not be advisable.
And you guys probably have titanium nitride at home. If you have a set of newer drill bits or sometimes something like that, a lot of times they'll use titanium nitride as a coating because it can increase the durability. But you also have them in bolt carrier groups. And guys, this isn't anything new. I was actually running a bolt carrier group, little history, back in the early 90s. I think it was like 90, 91. A company had given me one, and everybody made fun of me because I was running this gold bolt. But what does this titanium nitride do for this bolt?
For this, the titanium nitride is going to give it some additional hardness and lubricity properties. The problem is adhesion.
Yeah.
If you can get the stuff to stick onto your bolt carriers, you could already see on even some of the pieces that I've only run, this has got 10 rounds on this one.
Yeah.
And it's already broken through the coating. So, most of the materials that you get, if I were to prefer going, knowing what I know today, I would prefer maybe a DLC or something along those lines because the lubricity is a little bit better, I think. That's just my opinion.
Yeah.
And I know some of the guys do it, but you get into like the mil-spec bolt carriers, they're hard chromed on the inside of the channel where this rides.
Yes.
Nothing is going to outperform hard chrome. Like when we used to hard chrome parts, we used to have to bake out the nitrogen. That was typically done at a very low temperature, 300 degrees, depending on the size of the material or whichever. Could be baking out the nitrogen, that embrittlement. Like all our op rods on our bolt carriers, and sometimes we did cam pins and bolt heads. You would have to bake them out for at least 8 hours.
Okay.
And that would release that came from the manufacturer that was doing it for us, and we would go ahead and bake those out to get rid of embrittlement. When you're looking at the hard chrome barrels, they're already on stress relief material that's already probably 28 to 32. Probably stress relieving was probably done between 1,000 and 1,200 degrees. So At that point, I don't think that I don't think they would have to bake those out. Maybe they did at the manufacturer. We never did when we got those. But you know, when the hard chrome or that mil spec hard chrome was done properly, it's very difficult. It's very difficult to exceed that tack, especially on the inside of a barrel.
And that's why it's chosen so much for military rifles. We're not talking about you know, Stellite and all this other stuff. We're not talking about that kind of stuff.
I get it.
But chrome line barrels just last, and they're just maintenance free, but they're typically not as accurate from what I've seen.
It depends on who's doing it.
Yeah.
And again, it depends on your launch platform. If your barrel starts out being very, very, very good, and you got somebody who could do the chrome extremely effectively, then you know you're going to get that wear characteristic and also that accuracy. But as far as that, you know, that throat erosion and everything else, and just that lubricity and everything else that you get in regards to that. Now, guys are now doing salt bath nitriding, which is great because it reacts very good with, you know, 41 V50s or any of those kind of materials, or even an ion nitrite, which I believe a lot of the manufacturers, I believe even, I could be wrong, but HK might be doing ion. That ion nitriding on their barrels. Oh my good believers. I mean, the reaction that they get with those type of carbon steels, it's going to be very, very difficult to wear one of those out. I would say that, and including corrosion resistant factors.
So this right here would be an example of what on a bolt carrier group?
Nickel boron, which I really love to death.
You use nickel boron on the internals of some knives.
We do, and even the new builds now coming up, we've incorporated. We incorporated it into some special builds for a minute, but you know, probably by about mid-year, every OTF that we have is going to have internal nickel boron components because, again, you know, I think the OTFs work better when they're not lubed, and I think they run better dry. So we've had a great deal of luck with nickel boron. It's a cold finish, so you don't have to worry about disrupting, you know, your temper or disrupting your hardness or any of that sort of thing. So that nickel is, you know, the guys have been doing nickel for a good minute, all the way since back.
Can you do that on aluminum?
You know, I don't know. You know, we've never tried it. It would look funny, but you know, because it's, I don't know if you could, but I've seen some, you know, manufacturers in the AR parts do certain segments of the inside of the receivers with a select nickel, but I don't know if that would be required typically for us. The hard coat is the better choice for us as far as our production is concerned, but I do like nickel boron. I would prefer a nickel boron bolt carrier over a PV, a nitrided one, or a titanium nitrided one any day of the week.
Yeah. So now we're going to get into DLCs. Now DLC is a great material. You actually have a lot of examples of DLC. For those that might not be familiar, DLC is diamond-like carbon, okay? Now, diamond-like carbon is very similar to a PVD or a particle vapor deposition or something like that. But basically they use, and I've seen these chambers, but I'm not allowed to take pictures of this stuff when I'm there, but basically they take a vacuum. They were actually doing pistons for locomotives, and they were coating these pistons because it is extremely hard. Like how hard?
It's way up there, Ray.
Woodpecker lips.
It's harder than woodpecker lips for sure. But no, that's a fact. But it's very, very hard and very lubricant. It has all the properties that you really want, but it's thin. Don't forget that these are like 200 thousandths of an inch thick. They're 2/10 thick typically, and add little to no tolerancing as far as that's concerned. And that's, you know, why you have to, you know, make the best selection on your finish, number one, whether it's a blasted finish, whether you're using shot peen or you're using aluminum oxide, it could create, you know, under, you look at a blasted surface, it looks like grit, it looks like a road.
Under a microscope.
So if you have those upper surfaces that are coated and you knock those off, it appears to scratch through the finish. That's why typically PVD or DLC type finishes react if the material or the substrate is, number one, super hard, because it supports it. Think of like when they coat lenses. You know, you can coat lenses and everything else to get that scratch resistance, but once you break underneath that substrate, if the substrate gives, it chips the coating. So, you know, it's a difference between putting it on, like, it goes good on some of the bolt carrier components because those are typically carburized, where they have a super outside skin that's super hard. It might only be, you know, 10 to 15 thousandths thick, and then it goes into, you know, a more malleable core. But those upper surfaces are super hard, so they're going to suspend those coatings really, really well. And there's a couple knife manufacturers out there. The one that I use as an example all the time, it's a company out of Japan. And they typically run their knives out of like ZDP 189 or ZDP or all these really exotic Hitachi metals, but their typical hardnesses are like 65 Rockwell or better, and they put these micro finishes on. They do all their PVD coatings in-house. So it's part of the makeup and the DNA of what they do. So those super hard shells support that coating. And, you know, it's going to get you into the next question.
Well, I think a good example is that is like, let's say you had a phone with Gorilla Glass. That Gorilla Glass is extremely hard. And if we put it on an inspection plate, we could hit that glass with our hand and it's not going to do anything. But if I put it on your couch and sit on it, it breaks.
It's going to break. Or another great example is put it on a piece of balsa wood and just hit it. It's going to crack. It's like a sheet of glass. It would be the same way. If we put a sheet of glass on top of a steel plate that was perfectly flat and had a good finish to it, it'd be very, very difficult to break it.
Correct.
Where if, like you say, if you put it on the couch or put it on a carpet or put it on a rug or anything else, the substrate is very, very important for selecting a PVD or any of those types of coatings, because number one, you have to have a ideal situation with the substrate that'll take temperature. The lower temperature DLC coatings and chromium nitrates and stuff like that are done in an area that are safe for, let's say, doing your bolt heads. You wouldn't want to get a bolt head from a firearm and do a PVD coating on it, because it's gonna be inside a temperature range of about 975 degrees Fahrenheit. It's going to definitely disrupt something as far as the carburization or tempering is concerned.
PVD and DLC guys are very, very similar. PVDs are going to typically have a little more color range where you can do like golds. I mean, we had some PVD pistols done on a steel, but DLC works really, really well. There's a lot of manufacturers that do that. But this kind of brings me to another point is you got to be careful of that substrate like Tony was mentioning. So this is a piece of 7075 T6 aluminum, and this is another one that's been DLC'd. Now, this was not intentional. It was intentional, but unintentional. This is a testing thing. I've been carrying this for about a week, and I can tell you I've been carrying one of these that was Type 3 hard coat for about 6 months or longer. The new one shows like no wear. This one started showing wear after about 2 days. Literally, it is a beautiful look, and you can see the grain structure and the aluminum and everything, or at least what's there.
What it is it's how the parts were prepped. I mean, another thing for people to remember is just a lot of times we see this in the gun industry is a lot of gun manufacturers that make accessories do not tumble their parts.
Yeah.
Type 2, you can get away with going up to a sharp edge, barely. But on Type 3, it does not like to build on a sharp edge. Okay. So if you're not breaking the edges of your parts through vibratory finishing or any of those lines, it'll chip off. It'll chip. Because it's gonna be embrittled on that, and it shows that. When I learned from the anodizers very early on, that's something that they taught me, and they showed me underneath the scope, and it kind of looked like this on a burr. And you had to get it where it almost radiused apart, so you wouldn't get like shiny edges or any of those sorts of things.
Got it.
So what you're seeing on this piece is the pre-treatment before it were to go to anodize, and yes, it was done by accident. It was sent to one of our coders, and of course
they didn't catch it.
They didn't catch it, and they did a few of them. So when we got them back, we're like, oh my God, I didn't know what to think, but it's like it looked really cool, and it's like, all right, before we do anything kooky like this, because we've always steered away from doing aluminums because it's not hard enough to support the coating. So we just let Ray carry this thing for a little bit just to experiment.
Call it T&E, call it whatever. The thing is, it fires extremely smoothly because it has DLC on the inside. It has nickel boron internals. Yeah. It fires like $1,000,000. Right. But the problem is on the outside, it started showing signs of scratching just from carrying it in my pocket. Whether I'm hitting a flashlight with it or hitting my wallet with it, it's a little aluminum wallet. And then if I gently tapped on it with something else that was metal, it actually you could actually feel it that you wouldn't feel on a Type 3.
Right.
And the reason I mention this, guys, is I just reviewed this one 2 days ago. And I told you that it was DLC aluminum. And this is basically an AR-10 frame. And Tony, you really have no experience with this because you hadn't seen it before, but basically beautiful finish. I mean, great machine work on this billet aluminum. You can see some marks on it, more so in the upper than it was in the lower, just some tooling marks. But this rifle has exactly 240 rounds on it. Where do you see wear on this?
Yeah, you're starting to see it up in this section here where you get a little bit of recoil reciprocation up in here. Yeah.
There's actually some on the mag well too.
You got some on the mag well. Like I said, I mean, the DLC is wonderful.
It looks beautiful.
It looks great. It looks great. And, but, you know, again, not all coatings are created equal for certain applications. And like I said before, a super, super, super hard coating, but it's a thin film.
Yeah.
And that's what people have to remember. It does not penetrate the substrate. Okay, DLCs or these types of things do not penetrate the substrate.
They lay on the top.
They lay on the top. They do not penetrate where a hard coat anodized. Like, I'll give you an example. Okay, let's say that this is 2/10 thick.
Yep.
You know, for the users. Okay, and a hard coat anodize is this thick. Okay?
Got it.
Is 2/1000 thick. Half of that being penetrating into the substrate itself, and then half of it exposed, built up on the surface, and that is an oxide layer, a silicon like oxide layer that is, again, it is super, super hard. So it reinforces that upper section of that aluminum. It's very, very difficult to penetrate through it. I mean, I've showed guys, I'll get some of the chassis and I'll get my knife and I'll try to scrape through it. You got to really dig up underneath that hard coat to get in through it. So it's going to have wear characteristics unlike anything else.
Yeah, and so this example here, guys, this is a Type 3 mil-spec hard coat. This is actually on a shotgun machine gun, not shooting at YouTube. This actually has over 2,000 rounds on it. I've actually shot this in 3 majors, and I've actually done a bunch of videos with it, and there is how much wear here?
There is little to none. You got a little shine on the surface.
I see shininess, but it hasn't worn through.
That's what I was talking about. When you know, depending on how these are blasted, some guys will use aluminum oxide, which is sharp.
Yeah.
Some guys will use glass beads, which peens the surface. Then guys use.
You can do tungsten.
You could do tungsten. You could do any of these types of things that'll actually, you know, reinforce the surface a little bit. Yeah. And then when you go ahead and you do that, if you tumble them and you get a good finish on it to go into anodizing, it's gonna hold up very well. But those upper blasted surfaces will get matte and it'll cause a little shiny spot on the part where maybe it wears, but it's not breaching through the finish.
Got it.
Yeah.
So so the whole purpose of this video was to really kind of inform you guys about the different processes. You know, just because something's gold doesn't mean that it's titanium nitride. This is actually a Type 2 hard coat on aluminum. You've got to know the material and everything else, but also know, hey, should it be done here? Because we can doesn't mean you should. Just like this. Shouldn't. Looks good, looks unique, but I think over time this is going to show wear pretty quickly. 6 months, this is going to be almost unrecognizable.
Yeah, it's going to start breaking through, and you know, and it's something that we're looking at doing internally. You know, and if I can get to that point, a couple of the lines, because we get a great amount of traction with these coatings, because when it's done right, it's second to none. It's magnificent. So we want to have that ability. I would probably never get into anodizing in-house because that's a whole other field, but I think when our new heat treating line comes in this upcoming year, I think they're going to couple that with our ability to do at least chromium nitride and DLC in-house. This is a blade that started out as a mirror polish, but they either get it right or they'll have hazing on the pieces and they'll fall out. So,
got it.
You know, we've only had a couple manufacturers that have been able to do a high polish and mimic our finish, but I think a lot of it's in the handling. Oh. You know, so, yeah.
This is the Matrix, right?
It's been sitting in my closet upstairs for
got to do a little bit
years.
of a flick. Very beautiful, though. Has a deep black to it.
It does, and when it comes out right, it's amazing. But we struggle with that one there just because it's just handling. By the time we send these things optically perfect and optically clean. By the time they get to the coder, they get ran through their processing and their means, and then they go through their, you know, they have different means to clean in their parts. It doesn't always come out the way that it should. But you know, this is a great example of multiple different materials that are done up right. You know, and even over titanium is a very, very good substrate. It holds up as good as it can. You know, most of the beta grades we use are up in the mid-40s to begin with anyway. Yeah. You know, where the upper section of the 60, you know, of 60, 61 or 70, 75 is not going to be anywhere near in that hardness.
Got it.
You know, it's you know, for its tensile strength and everything else, it's unbelievable material, but anytime you could apply these DLC or PVD coatings to a much harder substrate, it supports it.
Yeah.
So, like I said, a super, you could do these glasses, and it would, if it got good adhesion, it would be beautiful. Because
Keeping DLC glasses?
They do it all the time.
Wow.
They do lenses, bro.
Interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it's not just the gun and the knife industry. I mean, these types of finishes are in all different sorts of things. There isn't a scope out there that doesn't have some type of coating on its lens, and it's done by a vapor deposition of some type.
Got it. You know, one of the best finishes ever was the Tennifer finish by Glock.
Oh man, yeah.
But that was cyanide based, and I think they couldn't bring that in the U.S. EPA, and
well, that's the thing. It was the way that they made their slides. It was a very, very specific material in their barrels, and whatever finish they were putting on there.
That's what that was. It was bomb-proof.
It was corrosion resistant, and it was bomb-proof, but it wasn't for like stainless steels. It was for they call it like number 2 barrel steel, which is that really, really high good alloy for making gun barrels and slides and all these sorts of things. But once they apply those coatings, very similar to even like your salt bath nitriding, reacts very, very well to certain materials that have already hit that heat treated and tempered, super high tensile, and then they get a super slick surface to them that's corrosion resistant, and also just that lubricity and everything else. Now you couldn't do your knife blades with with that sort of thing, because our tempering range is in that 500 degrees, 425 to 500 degrees, but we can on higher tensile materials like 3V or any of those types, because like M4, 3V, 1V, 3V, whichever go down the line.
You've forgotten more than I'll ever know.
You're looking at 3 tempers that are in that 900 to 1100 degree tempering range. So when you react that with a PVD coating, it doesn't affect its hardness.
Got it.
And just like the ion nitriding is the same way. I mean, we've done batches of, we have knives out there that we did 3V. It's expensive to do, but part of that heat treatment process was that last finish, and it was bulletproof to the point it would never. We could tell when we went to go sharpen through it. We wore out our. Not only were we grinding the 3V, but to put the edges and to cut through that surface coating, it was incredible.
I think a perfect example of that is this knife right here. So this knife has a plain edge and then full serrate. Now on the full serrate, you can see it's DLC'd, so that meant it was serrated before it went to DLC.
Serrated and honed, yeah.
If you had to DLC or serrate it after the fact, that would be very difficult, wouldn't it?
It is very difficult.
It would wear out tools.
It wears out the CBN wheels and
Yeah, so when you're sharpening this, how hard is it? A little bit harder?
I mean, let's just say from an average, when we're sharpening, our belt life, our abrasive life is absolutely half, if not even,
Got it. Just putting an edge on it.
Just breaking through that initial proportion. We like doing the serrations because what it does is when that's the difference on PVD and DLC coatings. If you have a super microfine edge, it doesn't build like the anodize. It'll support that cutting edge a little bit better. So what we're getting is an added life on these by doing them this way. And let's say if you were to sharpen, if you sharpen on just one side, you'll always have the finish to actually support the cutting edge.
Understood.
It does help. Yeah. It does help. And a lot of knife companies did that early on. They're like, hey, we have a knife and we had a PVD, we sharpened it and we PVD coated it. And it's right. If you sharpen it on the one side, it'll continue to support that cutting edge.
Nice.
Even on a little bit of material that's not that great.
Yeah.
So there's been some neat things. So we like to do it. It's subdued that way, but it also holds an edge a little bit better. Yeah.
Well, Tony, thanks for coming on the channel here.
Absolutely.
And hopefully you guys enjoyed that, learned a little bit of something. It can get really deep. It really can. I mean, way beyond my knowledge. And there are people that just do that for a living. And those guys are a wealth of knowledge because it is their specialty. Yes. And I knew that's also something that Tony knew a lot about. So hopefully you guys enjoyed that. We'll catch you on the next one. Next up will probably be a review of the HK, the MR556A4 that everybody's been talking about. So we'll talk to you soon. Have a good one.